Hey man, there's something deeply unsettling to most people about a man who doesn't cling. Not because he's cold or unavailable, but because he's internally complete. He doesn't rush to secure approval, he doesn't overinvest emotionally before trust is earned, and that quiet independence creates tension in the air. Not anxiety-driven tension, but curiosity, the kind that makes people lean in instead of pulling away. Because when a man isn't trying to extract validation, his presence feels heavier, more intentional. Detachment isn't indifference, that's where most men misunderstand it. Indifference is numbness, detachment is control. It's the ability to feel attraction without letting it hijack your behavior, to enjoy connection without losing your center. And when a woman senses that your emotional state isn't dependent on her reactions, something shifts. She feels less powerful over you. And paradoxically, that's what makes you more compelling. Most attraction today collapses because men reveal emotional dependence too early. They start adjusting their moods to her availability. They read into every message. They give more than what's been earned. And that imbalance communicates something dangerous. Not affection, but instability. A man who detaches doesn't rush intimacy. He allows space, and space creates contrast. Contrast creates desire. When you're not constantly seeking reassurance, your actions slow down, your words become measured, you stop filling silence out of discomfort, and silence, when you're grounded, doesn't push people away. It pulls them closer, because it signals confidence without performance. A woman doesn't feel chased, but she also doesn't feel ignored. She feels observed, and being truly seen without being pursued aggressively creates emotional tension. She can't easily dismiss. Detachment communicates that your life is already full. That connection is welcome, but not necessary for your stability. And humans instinctively value what doesn't need them, not out of cruelty, but out of psychology. Scarcity increases perceived value, not artificial scarcity, real independence. When your attention isn't freely available on demand, it carries weight. This is why men who stay calm during emotional shifts stand out. They don't escalate when she pulls back. They don't panic when energy fluctuates. They don't overcorrect. They simply remain consistent. And that consistency creates safety. Not the clingy kind, but the grounded kind. It tells her there's something solid beneath the surface, something unmoved by emotional weather. A detached man doesn't argue for attraction. He doesn't negotiate interest. He allows actions to speak. And that removes pressure from the interaction. There's no need to impress, no need to perform masculinity, no need to sell himself. That absence of effort is not laziness, it's certainty, and certainty is magnetic because it's rare. When a woman senses that losing access to you wouldn't destabilize you, her behavior changes. She becomes more attentive, more curious, not because she's manipulative, but because emotional independence triggers reflection. She feels the space where validation used to be, and instead of being chased, she becomes the one leaning forward. Detachment also filters the wrong connections. Those who thrive on control, chaos, or emotional leverage lose interest quickly. They can't anchor themselves to someone who won't react, but those who value depth, presence, and mutual respect feel drawn in. Because detachment doesn't reject intimacy, it protects it from being rushed or distorted. The man who detaches isn't playing games, he's simply no longer playing at all. He's rooted in his own direction. And when you're rooted, attraction isn't something you force, it's something that happens around you, naturally, quietly, powerfully. When a man isn't emotionally reactive, people feel it immediately. There's no urgency in his movements, no neediness in his tone. He doesn't chase moments or force closeness, and that calm presence creates a subtle contrast, especially in a world where emotional volatility is common. Without saying a word, he communicates that his inner world is stable, and stability has a gravitational pull most don't consciously understand. What actually changes attraction is not distance, but self-containment. A man who isn't trying to be chosen carries himself differently. He listens without leaning forward. He responds without over-explaining, and in those small behaviors, he signals confidence. Not the loud kind, but the kind that comes from knowing his life continues forward, regardless of how any single interaction unfolds. This is why emotional restraint often feels more powerful than emotional expression. Expression is easy. Anyone can open up quickly. Restraint requires awareness. It shows that you feel deeply but refuse to surrender control to impulse. That balance creates intrigue. It leaves room for curiosity, and curiosity keeps attention alive far longer than reassurance ever could. A woman senses when she is not the center of your emotional universe, and instead of pushing her away, that realization often grounds the interaction. There's less pressure, less performance, less manipulation on both sides. She doesn't feel responsible for your emotional state, and paradoxically, that freedom allows her interest to grow organically. When you stop adjusting yourself to maintain connection, something important happens: authenticity returns. You're no longer monitoring your words or managing reactions, you show up as you are. And authenticity, when it's calm and unforced, is far more compelling than exaggerated confidence or scripted charm. Men who remain steady during emotional fluctuations stand out because they don't mirror instability, they don't escalate tension or chase reassurance, they remain composed. That composure creates emotional contrast, one that invites reflection rather than reaction. Over time, this steadiness becomes associated with safety, strength, and maturity. Interest deepens when there's room to breathe, when every moment isn't saturated with communication, when silence isn't filled with anxiety. Space allows imagination to work, it allows anticipation to form, and anticipation is far more powerful than constant availability. It keeps engagement alive without forcing it. What many men miss is that emotional independence doesn't make you distant, it makes you selective. You still connect, you still care, but you don't give everything up front. You let consistency earn access, and that pacing protects both people from confusion and overinvestment. There's also a natural respect that forms when you don't chase validation. You don't argue for your value. You don't need to be understood immediately. You trust that the right people will recognize alignment without persuasion. That quiet certainty shifts the dynamic. It removes imbalance before it can form. Ultimately, attraction grows strongest in environments where pressure is absent, where presence is offered, not demanded. And a man who can remain grounded, composed, and self-directed creates exactly that environment without effort, without strategy, and without needing to say a thing. There's a noticeable shift in how conversations unfold when you're no longer trying to steer them toward a specific outcome. You speak when there's something to say, not to maintain momentum, and that restraint changes the energy. It removes urgency. It allows the interaction to develop naturally, instead of being pushed forward by expectation. When your sense of self isn't tied to someone else's response, you become harder to emotionally predict, and not in a manipulative way, simply in a grounded one. You're present without being dependent, engaged without being invested prematurely. That balance creates depth without pressure. Most people are used to emotional mirroring. If they pull back, the other person pulls harder. If they show interest, the other floods them with attention. When that pattern breaks, awareness forms. The absence of reaction invites reflection. It makes space for genuine interest, instead of habitual responses. You start noticing how often attraction fades when effort is disproportional. Too much availability collapses mystery. Too much reassurance kills tension. By staying centered, you allow desire to exist without being smothered, and desire needs room. It suffocates under constant validation. There's also a respect that comes from not chasing clarity. You allow behavior to reveal intention instead of demanding explanations. Over time, that approach filters out uncertainty without confrontation. You're no longer negotiating connection, you're observing alignment. Your body language changes when you're not emotionally overinvested. You move slower, you make less abrupt gestures. Your eye contact isn't searching, it's steady. These subtle cues communicate confidence more clearly than words ever could. People feel it before they understand it. The irony is that when you stop trying to be impressive, you become more memorable. Presence without performance stands out in a world saturated with noise. You're not trying to win attention, you're allowing it to find you, and attention that arrives this way carries more weight. There's no internal scramble to keep someone interested, no pressure to say the perfect thing. You trust that if connection is real, it won't require constant maintenance. That trust relaxes the dynamic, and relaxed energy invites curiosity far more effectively than tension ever will. This approach doesn't repel emotionally healthy women, it attracts them. Those who value calm, direction, and emotional maturity feel safer around someone who doesn't chase intensity. The absence of desperation becomes a signal of self-respect, not disinterest. At its core, attraction responds to emotional sovereignty. When a man governs his inner world, he stops leaking energy outward. And that containment, quiet, controlled, unforced, is what makes his presence linger long after the interaction ends. You begin to notice how little needs to be said when your presence is grounded. Conversations don't rely on momentum or charm, they breathe. And in that breathing space, attention sharpens. People listen more closely when they don't feel pushed, when nothing is being extracted from them emotionally. This calm way of engaging shifts power dynamics without confrontation. You're no longer reacting to emotional tests or fluctuations. You allow them to pass without commentary. That lack of reaction doesn't frustrate, it unsettles in a reflective way. It forces awareness, and awareness changes behavior more effectively than argument ever could. Interest deepens when effort is mutual. By not overextending, you create room for reciprocity. If it appears, connection grows naturally. If it doesn't, you lose nothing. This approach prevents emotional imbalance before it forms and keeps you aligned with your own standards. There's an internal stillness that develops when you trust outcomes to reveal themselves. You're no longer managing impressions or worrying about timing. You allow interactions to unfold at their own pace. That patience communicates confidence, not the kind that announces itself, but the kind that doesn't need to. You also realize how much attraction relies on emotional pacing. Too fast overwhelms, too slow disengages, but steady presence, consistent without pressure, creates safety and intrigue simultaneously. That balance is rare because it requires self-regulation, not strategy. People sense when you're not emotionally hungry. Your attention feels optional, not urgent. And optional attention is valued more because it's chosen. It's not driven by need, it's driven by intention. That distinction matters more than most realize. What emerges over time is a subtle authority, not dominance, not control, just certainty. You don't rush closeness, you don't resist it either. You respond to what's real, not what you hope will be. And that realism keeps you steady, regardless of how things unfold. This steadiness also protects you from disappointment. Expectations remain measured. You don't attach narratives too early. You let behavior speak over time. And when clarity arrives, it doesn't shock you. It confirms what you already sensed. You begin attracting people who are comfortable with depth, not drama. Those who need constant emotional stimulation drift away. Those who value presence lean in. The filtering happens naturally, without effort or explanation. By now, you understand that attraction doesn't come from pursuit, it comes from alignment. When your inner world is ordered, your outer interactions follow, and that quiet order is what people respond to most, even if they can't explain why. As this way of moving becomes natural, you stop noticing it as a technique and start experiencing it as your default state. You're not holding back, you're simply not overreaching, and that difference changes how people respond to you. Interactions feel cleaner, less charged with expectation, more rooted in genuine interest. You begin to see how many connections fail, not because of incompatibility, but because of emotional overexposure. When everything is revealed too quickly, nothing has time to deepen. By pacing yourself, you allow trust to form organically, and trust, once earned, creates attraction that doesn't evaporate at the first sign of uncertainty. There's a noticeable reduction in internal noise. You're no longer running scenarios in your head or trying to predict outcomes. You stay present, and presence, real presence, has weight. It communicates that you're comfortable in the moment, not anxiously reaching for the next one. What stands out is how little you need external affirmation to feel secure. Compliments are appreciated, not required. Attention is welcomed, not chased. And that independence subtly shifts how others relate to you. They sense that your confidence isn't borrowed, it's owned. You also realize that attraction isn't sustained by intensity alone, it's sustained by respect. And respect grows when you don't compromise your rhythm to maintain closeness. You keep your pace, you honor your time, and in doing so, you teach others how to treat you, without lectures or ultimatums. Moments of silence no longer feel awkward, they feel intentional. You don't rush to fill them, you allow them to exist. And silence, when it's comfortable, creates intimacy far deeper than constant conversation ever could. Over time, this composure becomes unmistakable. People notice how you don't flinch when energy shifts, how you don't overcorrect when things slow down. That steadiness communicates emotional maturity, something increasingly rare and deeply attractive to those who recognize it. You stop trying to manage perception and start trusting alignment. If interest grows, it grows naturally. If it fades without drama, and either outcome leaves you intact. That resilience removes fear from connection and replaces it with curiosity. The strongest effect of this approach is internal. You feel less drained after interactions, more centered, more clear. You're no longer giving away pieces of yourself just to feel wanted. You remain whole, regardless of the outcome. At this stage, attraction becomes a byproduct rather than a pursuit. People are drawn to the calm order you carry, and that order doesn't come from strategy, it comes from self-mastery. Practice daily, quietly, without needing recognition. You start to recognize how rare it is for someone to feel emotionally unpressured in your presence. Most interactions in modern dating carry an unspoken demand: attention, reassurance, momentum. When that demand disappears, curiosity replaces resistance. People don't feel evaluated or cornered, they feel free. And freedom is where genuine interest grows. This way of showing up also changes how conflict unfolds. There's no escalation, no emotional bargaining. You listen without absorbing chaos. You respond without defensiveness. And that composure sets a boundary without needing to state one. It shows that you can engage without being consumed, and that balance commands respect. You notice how attraction stabilizes when there's no fear of loss driving behavior. You're not trying to secure a future or protect an outcome. You're focused on the present interaction, the present truth. That presence grounds everything. It removes urgency, and urgency is what usually distorts connection. People become more intentional around you because they sense you won't tolerate inconsistency, disguised as emotion. You don't punish it, you don't react to it, you simply don't lean into it. And that quiet refusal forces clarity. Either alignment appears, or distance creates itself naturally. There's a confidence that forms when you realize you don't need to be emotionally unforgettable to be meaningful. You don't need dramatic highs or intense declarations. You allow depth to form slowly, and depth formed this way doesn't collapse under pressure, it strengthens. Your energy becomes less scattered. You're no longer splitting focus between potential outcomes and present reality. That concentration sharpens how you move through conversations, how you make decisions, how you read situations. You're not guessing, you're observing. What once felt risky now feels stable. You trust yourself to walk away from misalignment without resentment. You trust yourself to stay present without attachment. And that trust removes fear from the equation. When fear leaves, attraction changes form. It becomes grounded instead of reactive. You begin to see how emotional self-governance influences everything else in your life. Work improves, focus deepens, purpose clarifies. You're no longer leaking energy into uncertainty, and that internal order radiates outward, shaping how others perceive and respond to you. People don't always understand why they feel drawn to this version of you. They just feel it. The absence of need, the steadiness, the sense that you're moving somewhere, regardless of who joins you. That direction is compelling because it's real. By now, attraction isn't something you think about much at all. It's no longer a problem to solve. It's a response to how you live, how you carry yourself, and how firmly you're rooted in your own life. And that rootedness speaks louder than any effort ever could. At this stage, you realize how much attraction is shaped by emotional leadership rather than emotional display. You're no longer trying to prove strength. You embody it through consistency. You don't react impulsively. You don't rush decisions. And that self-direction creates a sense of orientation that others instinctively respond to. You also notice how your patience has changed. It's no longer passive or hopeful. It's deliberate. You're willing to let time reveal intent instead of forcing clarity prematurely. That patience communicates confidence because it shows you're not afraid of outcomes. You trust your ability to handle whatever unfolds. Interactions become cleaner when you're not chasing momentum. You don't mistake excitement for connection. You don't confuse availability with interest. You observe how someone shows up over time, how they handle uncertainty, how they respond when attention isn't guaranteed. These moments tell you far more than words ever could. What once felt like emotional risk now feels like emotional discipline. You understand that giving access too quickly blurs boundaries. By pacing yourself, you protect the integrity of connection. You allow depth to grow instead of flooding the space with expectation. That restraint preserves attraction rather than exhausting it. There's also a noticeable shift in how you're treated. People are more intentional with their words and actions around you, not because you demand it, but because your presence sets a tone. You don't tolerate confusion, yet you don't confront it aggressively. You simply don't engage with it. This steadiness removes the need for control on both sides. There's no emotional tug of war, no power struggle, just clarity. And clarity either strengthens alignment or exposes misalignment quickly. Either outcome saves time and emotional energy. You begin to appreciate how simplicity strengthens attraction. Fewer explanations, fewer reactions, less emotional clutter. What remains is presence, direct, grounded, unforced, And presence like that is rare because it requires self-awareness, not strategy. Your sense of self no longer fluctuates based on how others respond. You remain composed, whether interest increases or fades. That composure is felt immediately. It signals maturity, security, and depth, qualities that don't need to announce themselves. At this level, you're no longer concerned with being chosen. You're focused on choosing well. You don't rush alignment. You don't force chemistry. You allow connection to earn its place in your life. That selectiveness sharpens attraction rather than dulling it. Ultimately, what people respond to is not distance, mystery, or silence. It's stability. A man who governs his inner world creates a gravity that doesn't pull, it invites. And those who are ready for depth feel it instantly, even if they can't put it into words. You notice how attraction becomes quieter but more durable when it's no longer fueled by emotional spikes. It doesn't rush in and disappear just as quickly. It settles, it lingers. People feel drawn, not because of excitement, but because of how steady things feel around you. That steadiness becomes a reference point. They don't easily forget. The absence of urgency changes how others behave. They become more intentional. They think before acting. They show up with greater clarity because they sense that inconsistency won't be chased or rewarded. This isn't control, it's consequence. When attention isn't automatic, effort becomes deliberate. You stop interpreting silence as rejection. You stop seeing distance as danger. Instead, you treat both as information. And information, when observed calmly, removes anxiety from the equation. You no longer rush to fill gaps with effort or explanation. You allow truth to surface naturally. There's a grounded confidence in knowing you don't need to hold someone's interest together through constant engagement. You trust that real curiosity sustains itself, and when it doesn't, you don't internalize the loss. You recognize misalignment without personalizing it. People sense when your attention isn't reactive. You don't mirror moods, you don't escalate emotions, you remain present without absorbing instability. That presence becomes soothing rather than stimulating, and soothing energy creates deeper attachment than excitement ever could. You also begin to value how little explanation your actions require. You don't announce boundaries, you live them. You don't justify decisions, you make them. That quiet decisiveness communicates self-respect far more effectively than verbal assertions ever could. Interest deepens when interactions feel voluntary instead of managed. There's no pressure to perform, no anxiety about losing ground, just two people meeting where they are. And when that balance exists, connection feels clean, free of manipulation or emotional leverage. What stands out most is how much emotional space you create simply by staying regulated. You're not distant, you're available without being exposed. That balance keeps attraction alive without exhausting either side. It allows desire to grow without forcing it. You begin noticing who leans in when things are calm. Those who crave chaos drift away. Those who value stability remain. This natural sorting process saves you from investing in dynamics that would have drained you in the past. By now, attraction feels less like something you chase and more like something that finds you. Not because you're withholding, but because you're whole. And people are always drawn to what feels complete, grounded, and undisturbed. There's a subtle authority in how you carry yourself when you no longer seek emotional leverage. You don't need reactions to feel relevant. You don't fish for reassurance. And that absence of need creates a presence that's difficult to ignore, even in silence. You become more attuned to energy than words. Tone, pacing, effort, these signals guide your responses. You don't confront uncertainty aggressively. You simply don't invest further into it. That discernment keeps you centered and prevents emotional overextension. People sense that your attention is intentional, not habitual. When you engage, it's because you choose to, not because you're filling space. And chosen attention carries more meaning than constant availability ever could. The dynamic changes when you stop giving energy to ambiguity. You don't argue about feelings. You don't analyze behavior out loud. You observe quietly. And quiet observation often reveals more truth than confrontation ever would. There's an ease in knowing that connection doesn't need to be forced. You trust natural pacing, you trust time, and that trust allows attraction to build without distortion or pressure. You notice how often people test emotional boundaries without realizing it. When those tests don't receive reaction, they lose power. What remains is genuine intent or absence of it. Both outcomes offer clarity without conflict. Your emotional bandwidth feels protected. You're no longer drained after interactions. You're no longer replaying moments in your head. That mental clarity, reinforces your sense of self, and keeps you aligned with your direction. You also realize that depth doesn't require intensity. It requires consistency, shared presence, mutual respect, and those qualities reveal themselves slowly, only when space is allowed. The calm you carry becomes something others lean into, not because you promise excitement, but because you offer steadiness, and steadiness in a chaotic environment feels rare and valuable. Attraction no longer feels like a game you have to play correctly. It feels like a response to how you live, how you choose, and how firmly you remain rooted in yourself. And that rootedness speaks louder than any effort ever could. What becomes clear near the end of this journey is that attraction was never about doing more. It was about needing less. Less reassurance, less control, less outcome dependence. When those needs fall away, what remains is presence. And presence is something people feel immediately, even when nothing is said. You stop viewing connection as something fragile that must be constantly protected. You understand that what's real can withstand pauses, silence, and uncertainty. What can't was never solid to begin with. That understanding removes fear from your interactions and replaces it with composure. There's a quiet shift in how you interpret interest. You don't read into fluctuations. You don't build narratives around temporary distance. You allow things to unfold, and by doing so, you protect yourself from emotional overinvestment while remaining open to genuine connection. People who are drawn to this energy often don't articulate why. They just feel more grounded around you, less rushed, less pressured. Your calm creates contrast in a world addicted to emotional noise, and that contrast is what makes your presence memorable. You no longer confuse attention with affection. You look for consistency over excitement, behavior over words, effort over promises. These markers guide your decisions quietly, without internal conflict. You trust what you see, instead of what you hope. This approach doesn't make you distant, it makes you selective. You engage fully where alignment exists, and step back where it doesn't. There's no resentment in that movement, just discernment. And discernment keeps your emotional life clean. You begin to notice how often attraction strengthens when you remain anchored, regardless of outcome. Whether someone stays or goes no longer determines your emotional state. That independence communicates maturity more clearly than any declaration ever could. The man you become through this process isn't chasing connection, he's creating a life that connection must fit into. His direction is clear, his pace is steady, and anyone who walks alongside him does so by choice, not necessity. In the end, attraction responds to inner order. When your thoughts are aligned, your actions measured, and your life moving forward, people feel it. They're drawn not to mystery or distance, but to stability that doesn't demand anything in return. And that's the quiet truth most never learn. When you master your inner world, the outer world responds naturally. You stop reaching, you stop proving, you simply move forward, grounded, composed, and unmistakably centered in who you are.